just bought your first DSLR. This is not a DSLR actually. This is a camera I got from could I call them a family friend? It wasn't working when I was given the camera, but when I was given this camera, it kind of gave me some emotional kind of situation where I felt like, yo, you know, people actually think that this is actually something that I wanted to do, because at the time I wasn't quite sure and it was just a hobby. And I'm glad that this happened. You know, I can't wait to be at a point where maybe I have a little studio or warehouse where I could put this with other cameras that I will have in the future. You know, I gotta put it out there. And yeah, this camera is gonna be with me for the longest because, yo, I really love what I do, and this is just a reminder that, you know, someone did kind of see that and just said, here's a camera. You know, even though it didn't work, like, you know, I just appreciate it somehow. And yeah, man, that's just what I wanted to share with you guys, even though it's not really necessary with this video. It's just something that I'll use as a prop like now. And yeah, I don't think that this camera works, because it doesn't. So here's a scenario. Let's assume you just bought your first camera and you're seeing so many different buttons on it and you're wondering, what are these buttons for? You don't even know what to do with the camera. And maybe you were like me and you discover the shutter button and the auto mode, and you start taking pictures in auto all the time. You start seeing so many beautiful images on Instagram from your favorite photographers and whatnot, and you wonder to yourself, why aren't my pictures as dope as those people's pictures? And you start thinking to yourself, what's the next step? So in this video, you're gonna learn 3 basic settings that you should always get right in camera if you want that perfect picture. So cue intro. Hey, what's good YouTube? My name is LB and I'm a photographer slash filmmaker based in Gaborone, Botswana. If you're new to the channel, I make videos related to photography and filmmaking, so make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified each and every time I drop a new video, and like, also give a share to your friends that may be interested in photography. Like I was saying in the beginning, so you discovered your auto mode and now you start shooting all your photos in auto. First thing I want to tell you is change that dial to manual. You don't want to be shooting auto if you want to do photography as a career, or you want to do it just as a hobby. But at the end of the day, you want to start taking nice pictures. So make sure that you remove your camera from auto mode and start shooting manual. We're going to talk about 3 basic settings that you need to know if you want to start taking nice pictures. First being shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. These 3 settings, all together known as the exposure triangle. Essentially, manual mode is going to help you with is being able to control your camera. You're going to stop letting your camera think for you and start letting you, the user of the camera, start thinking for the camera. Because not every situation you'd find that your camera is able to kind of understand the type of environment that you're in. So make sure you switch your camera to manual mode so that you're able to essentially control or use your camera to its maximum capabilities. First, we're going to look at shutter speed. You may ask, what is shutter speed? Well, in a more simplified version, in this video I'm not going to go too scientific about all these settings. If you want those kind of videos, I know a lot of other videos or YouTubers that have already covered these topics in much more detail. This is just generally a very dumbed down version of it, just to get you started quick and shooting. What is shutter speed? Shutter speed is essentially the length of time your camera shutter is open. So depending on how fast or how slow your shutter plays a part in how long or the length of time that your camera shutter will be open. Essentially, the faster your shutter speed, faster your camera shutter will open and close. And when your camera shutter is open, what it essentially is doing is allowing light to hit your camera sensor, and hence you are able to record or get the image that you are essentially taking. The lower your shutter speed, the more time that your camera shutter will be open, and the more you're able, the more light that is entering your camera, and images where there's a lot of action that's happening in the scene. So you want to use a higher shutter speed, especially if you're shooting like sporting events or whatever scenario that you're shooting in that requires a very high shutter speed, or where there's a lot of action. You'd want to use a high shutter speed for such scenarios in order to get that motion in your camera. In the scenarios where you'd want to use a lower shutter speed is examples of like portraits. If you're shooting portraits like I do, or anything that's not moving, or just a still image or object, you'd want to use a low shutter speed, because essentially your object is just standing still. Moving on to aperture. What aperture is the opening in your lens. Your aperture controls the amount of light that enters your camera. The higher aperture, the less light that enters your camera, and the lower your aperture, the more light that enters your camera. Aperture also controls your depth of field. Like in this scenario, I have a practical at the back of me, and you don't really see the detail of the background, or you would be able to see the grunge in the back, or the grungy wall that I have in the background. I'm shooting at a very low aperture, hence you're seeing this blurry background and the shallow depth of field that you're getting, and you're not able to tell essentially the detail. You're not able to see the detail in the background. So if you're shooting at a very low aperture, that's going to create that shallow depth of field in your images. Scenarios where you wouldn't want to use a low aperture is scenarios where you're essentially shooting a landscape, or something that an interior maybe, where you want to get everything in focus. So you wouldn't want to use a very low aperture for such scenarios. And now getting on to ISO. ISO is your light sensitivity, right? It controls the light sensitivity of your camera, but ISO also has its limits, right? You don't want to push your ISO at a very high amount. That's when you start to introduce such things such as grain and noise, and no one wants noise or grain in the images. So always make sure that you understand your camera capabilities and where they lie. So if you're in a very bright environment, you wouldn't want to use a very high ISO level, because essentially ISO is a very finicky kind of setting that you don't want to overdo it, because that might start introducing such artifacts such as grain or noise in your image, and no one wants a noisy image, because if you have a noisy image, trust me, that image is practically unusable. Yes, there are some scenarios where you can recover your image by using such things like that help denoise your image, but in the photo kind of scene, you don't really have those powerful tools to help you denoise an image or remove grain, unless you're going for an artistic look. But normally it's best to always add grain in post rather than shooting an image that's grainy, if that makes sense. I hope with these things that you have learned today, your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed, you can now go and start to take your images and start to practice more, because practice makes perfect. These things may be a bit of a hard thing to get at first, but trust me, with time you get them and you understand them, and you can essentially start to take better images, and it'll just be like breathing. With that being said, guys, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel. I make videos related to photography and filmmaking. Also, like this video if you got a thing or two from it. Leave a comment if you want, and see you in the next video. Before I leave you guys, I just want to say I appreciate each and everyone that subscribed. My first video was quite a challenge to film, because I'm not really used to being in front of the camera, but I thank each and every one of you that took the time to just subscribe and like the video, and I appreciate all the comments and feedback that I got from you guys. Thank you to everyone. I appreciate you guys, and I'm happy to be starting this journey knowing that the people that are watching my videos, and they can appreciate what I essentially give out to the world, because yeah. So thank you guys, I appreciate you guys, and Let's grow, let's learn, have fun, and be creative.